My name is Kim Savitt, and this is panel 1715. The title of our panel is Middle East, an Integrated Strategy for Peace. Before we start, I'm going to ask that everybody please check and make sure you've turned off your cell phones. If you haven't, now's a great time to do it.
Do panelists have to do that too?
Well, you know, for you, oh, never mind. But we appreciate that you are all here, and I am delighted to be able to introduce our panel today. It's a very exciting topic and group. First thing I'd like to do, I'd like to give you a little sense of what we're going to be doing here. Each of our panelists is going to be able to have a time to speak, and then we are going to open it up for questions and answers. I would like to make sure that when you stand up to ask a question, if you please make sure it ends with a question mark, that would be helpful. Thank you. All right. I am delighted first to introduce Ambassador Martin Indyk. Ambassador Indyk served, as you have read in the bios, as our U.S. Ambassador to Israel during President Clinton's administration, is the director of the Saban Center at Brookings, and while I have to admit I have not yet read his most recent book, Innocent Abroad, an intimate account of American peace diplomacy, I hope to learn more about it today, and I have to let you know in advance, Ambassador, that I have a hard time considering you an innocent. We also have with us today Saad Eddin Ibrahim. I had not had the honor of meeting Saad before today, but I thought I would give you some insight into his work as a human rights activist by quoting from who would know him best, his wife, who is Nancy Latham, and who has said, everyone has counseled him to stop being so outspoken, but we've known in our hearts he never will. It's so much a part of who he is. At the same time, he's given us an opportunity at every level of our family lives to be involved in something that has meaning way beyond what we are doing in our personal lives. He is always hopeful, no matter what the obstacle. So we are delighted to welcome him here today. We also have Joseph Cirincione, who is been described as he went into his new position as president of the Ploughshares Fund, that he's been described as one of the great high-energy intellectuals in Washington, who knows that the stakes in Washington are big in Washington, and that the policy battles we engage in really matter. They do. He is also was also an advisor to the Obama campaign on nuclear policy and nonproliferation. And the question that was asked is, how long will he remain in this post? Finally, I'm going to introduce Dr. Ziad Asali. Dr. Asali, I met as a member of the U.S. official delegation to observe the Palestinian presidential elections in January 2005. And at the time we were traveling with, I think, then Senator Joseph Biden. We were also both official monitors with the National Democratic Institute of the Palestinian legislative elections in January 2006. Dr. Asali is president of the American Task Force on Palestine, and we look forward to hearing his insights today as well. So with that, I'm going to say thank you and welcome all of our panelists, and turn to Ambassador Indyk first.
Thank you very much, Kim. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be with you today here in Boulder. I've given you my greatest gift, which is my daughter, who lives here. So it's a special pleasure for me. But beyond that, it's a special pleasure to be sitting next to my hero, Saad Ibrahim. I say he's my hero because he is the most courageous man in the Middle East that I know, and has done an amazing service to the cause of freedom and human rights by his courageous stand against the Egyptian government. So we are all very honored to have Saad with us today. The question that we were asked to address was how to develop an integrated Middle East strategy for peace in a shameless effort to promote book sales. I will tell you that what I'm about to say is drawn from the book that I've just published, and you can actually purchase it around the corner at the bookstore, they assure me. But I say that not just in shameless self-promotion, but because I was involved with President Clinton in an 8-year-long effort designed to try to achieve comprehensive peace in the Middle East, an end to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And we adopted an integrated approach, or what we thought was an integrated approach, that took into account the need to deal with rogue regimes in Iraq and Iran while we sought to make peace between Israel, the Palestinians, and Israel's Arab neighbors. And we failed. And the consequences of that failure were, in the first instance, the decision of President Bush to walk away from the whole effort and let Palestinians and Israelis have at it, which is exactly what they did. And in the process destroyed the whole edifice of peacemaking that not just the Clinton administration, but successive administrations, Democratic and Republican before Clinton, had built up. And it was a terrible tragedy from my point of view, a tragedy that is still playing itself out, as we saw in the conflict in Gaza last January. And so I tried to draw the lessons of that failure for the next time an American president would commit himself, as Clinton did, to the effort to try to achieve peace in the Middle East. And to my amazement, Barack Obama came forward and committed himself and our nation to that task on the second day of his presidency, appointing George Mitchell as his special envoy for Middle East peace, and making clear that he was going to persist in the effort, no matter how difficult it now is, to try to achieve this noble fail. And that was a major mistake, to walk away from the process. And so essentially the first lesson is one that Obama already has taken on board. The second relates to Kim's suggestion that I'm not so innocent, but we were innocent in a variety of ways, or perhaps naive is a better way to describe it. And there is a naivete that runs through American policy towards the Middle East. There's something naive about the encounter that, in fact, previous administrations, including Clinton and Bush, had in common. It's one part innocence, it's one part ignorance, and it's one part arrogance. But it combines to have a very profound effect on our ability to achieve a peace in the Middle East. The innocent part is the good side. We feel that because Providence has shone its face upon us, that we have a duty to try to spread our good fortune to other parts of the world, particularly the troubled Middle East. And we feel that as a result that we can go into this region and heal it, make it better. The arrogance is the sense that we have the solution, that we know how to resolve these conflicts, that we can make this part of the world over in our own image, either as a more peaceful place or a more democratic place. And that's where the ignorance comes in. Because we think we can do it, we pay too little attention to the history, the culture, the values that predominate in that part of the world. And as a consequence, we, in combination, these factors end up pursuing approaches that have failed in the past, whether it was Bill Clinton or George Bush in that regard. So the second point is that we need to pursue a more humble, more realistic, and an approach that is much more cognizant of the cross-currents and undercurrents, and perhaps most importantly of all, the way that things are integrated there, which brings us to the point of this panel. And Barack Obama has said very clearly that everything's connected there. And we need to understand that what happens in the Gulf will affect what happens in the Arab-Israeli arena as much as what happens in the Arab-Israeli arena will affect the Gulf. And that is especially the case today because as a result of the mistakes of the Bush administration, we have managed to open the arena to Iran in its efforts to seek to dominate the region. And it has managed to spread its influence first into Iraq through the rise of the Shia parties into the government there, then through neighboring Syria to the west, through the alliance that it has with the minority Alawite regime in Damascus, through to Hezbollah, the Shiite party in Lebanon, which represents the largest grouping in Lebanon, the Shias there, and through to Hamas in Gaza, which has over the last few years become somewhat of a proxy for Iran. And this has enabled Iran to, in effect, play in the most sensitive issues of the Arab world, the issue of Lebanon and the issue of Palestine. And as a consequence of that, we see that Arab leaders, Sunni to a man, there are no women Arab leaders yet, Sunni to a man, find this interference by Iran and this attempt at Iranian dominance of their part of the Middle East unacceptable. And they find themselves very much on the defensive. And they find themselves in a situation where they have the problem of Iranian interference is compounded by Iran's efforts to acquire a nuclear capability on the one hand, and Iran's pronouncement of a narrative that is resonating in the Arab street and more broadly in the Muslim world. It is a narrative that goes simply like this: violence, resistance, defiance of the international community, the UN Security Council, is the way to achieve justice and dignity for the Palestinian people and the Arab people. And this is a theme that is picked up by Hamas and by Hezbollah, who argued that through violence and terrorism they can get Israel to withdraw, as it withdrew from Lebanon, as it withdrew from Gaza, and that this is the way to liberate Palestine. For the Arab leaders, that's a deeply problematic message, because the alternative narrative that the United States represents when we have a president who wants to make peace in the Middle East, the narrative of peacemaking and negotiations and reconciliation as the best way of achieving the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, that narrative has been almost completely discredited over the last 8 years. And so when Obama comes around to peacemaking, as he has decided he wants to do, he faces a landscape that is barren, a balance of power that has seemed to shift in favor of Iran and its allies, and a real credibility problem when it comes to trying to promote peace. So what is to be done? I'll say it very quickly and we can get into it in the discussion. Essentially, we need a three-pronged strategy. It's a complicated choreography, but it is an integrated strategy. We need, on the one hand, to be promoting Israeli-Palestinian peace. On the second front, we need to take advantage of the fact that the leader of Syria has been saying for the last 4 years that he wants to make peace with Israel, to launch Israeli-Syrian negotiations. And we need to, as President Obama has said, hold out our hand to Iran if they are willing to unclench their fist. And therefore, in this way, by pursuing these three initiatives simultaneously, we can advantage each one if we can make progress on the others. My time is up, but let me just give you one sentence of a sense of how this can work. If the Syrians are willing to make peace with Israel, that puts pressure on the Iranians to either make their deal with the United States or find themselves left behind as a new, more peaceful order is established. It puts pressure on Hamas to go along with Palestinian moderates like Abu Mazen who want to negotiate peace with Israel. And it gives them cover for engaging on the Palestinian track. So you have a kind of symbiotic relationship in which progress on one front can advantage progress on the other two. Thank you.
Thank you. Saad Eddin. Please.
Well, thank you very much for sharing this panel with us this afternoon. I'm honored, I'm pleased to be here. I'm honored because I'm in this distinguished company on the panel. Martin Indyk is one of my gurus. And he is the one who immediately after Sadat's assassination knew that I had met with President Sadat 5 weeks after the assassination. He invited me to the Washington Institute to relate my experience, my last encounter with Sadat, which I did in a book called Vindication of Sadat. And the reason I chose that title is because during Sadat's life, I was against him. However, meeting him 5 weeks before his assassination, and then seeing how things unfolded in the years after that, I realized how ahead of time this man was. And it is really due to that encounter with President Sadat, which Martin Indyk encouraged me to write in a book form, in a monograph form, is what I'm going to draw on in my remarks. Let me say 5 very quick telegraphic messages. The first message has to do with why the Middle East is so important. Too important to be left to the Middle Easterners alone. For one thing, the US has been militarily involved in the Middle East 10 times in the last 50 years. 10 times in the last 50 years. That is on the average once every 5 years, in which some American and Middle Eastern blood was spilled. And that is the one area in the world since Vietnam that has appropriated as much energy, as much resources of both the military and the diplomacy, American diplomacy and American military, as any region in the world. And it probably will continue to do so. So it is important for you all to take an interest in the region and to follow closely what your politicians are doing in our region. My second point is that given that importance, given the fact that the people in the Middle East, like the people anywhere in the world, like to lead decent life, to raise families, to send their kids to school, to improve their living standards, they are tired of the violence that have benighted the region. A violence that is measured by the Swedish Institute, SIBRI, as with only 5% of the world population, the Middle East has appropriated nearly between 40 and 45% of the world armed violence since 1945. So people in the Middle East are fatigued, are tired of that violence. They'd like to get it over with and to lead their life normally and to join the rest of the world. And that is something that President Sadat sensed. And that's something that he acted on courageously. And that is where I will draw some lessons for the future, for this integrated approach to peace in the Middle East. What President Sadat did was to sense something I did not sense at the time. He was ahead of me. Here I was a social scientist, the so-called expert, the one who studies, the one who thought, and yet the man was so insightful and so courageous that he was ahead of me and ahead of all the Egyptian intelligentsia, all of the Arab intelligentsia, in taking that bold move, the peace initiative, by going to Tel Aviv, by signing a peace treaty. A peace treaty, by the way, which 3 days ago is 40 years old. It was signed in April 1979. And when you think about it, the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, that is the longest stretch, time-wise, in which there has not been a war between Israel and any Arab state. Sadat realized, and I think the Israelis wisely realized, that if Egypt goes to peace, there will be no more interstate wars in the region. However, having said that, the nature of the conflict has shifted from interstate wars to wars in which non-state actors are now the most dangerous elements in the region. Non-state actors like Hamas, like Hezbollah, like Qaeda, like all of Taliban, these are the non-state actors who have been really calling the shots in the Middle East. It is no longer the states. And this is a lesson that the Israelis have to learn very quickly and to come on board for peace with the Palestinians. Because the longer they drag their feet on that, the more non-state actors will spread in the region and will create havoc not only for us in the region, but for the whole world. All right, what do we conclude from that? We conclude from people are fatigued, people want peace, there is no lack of plans, of proposals. We have 4 or 5 proposals now on the table. One was the roadmap by former President Bush, but there is also one by the Arab League, by the Arab Summit that was concluded in Beirut back in 2002. First time the Arab states collectively offered to make peace with Israel in return for total withdrawal of Israel from Arab territories, occupied Arab territories. And then there is a third initiative that was worked out by both the Israeli and the Palestinian civil society. And they negotiated in Geneva, came back, was a draft agreement, debated it in both countries. I don't know if Martin was on the scene at the time or not, but after a few weeks of debate, they commissioned public opinion, polling agencies, to test whether Palestinians and Israelis would agree to that Geneva initiative or Geneva Convention. And they get a majority of Israelis, a majority of Palestinians to agree with it. Talking about 55 to 60% of both communities agreed to that Geneva Convention, which calls for two-state solution, withdrawal, return of a symbolic number of refugees to Palestine pre-1948, to internationalization of Jerusalem to be the capital of both countries. These kind of elements in the agreement were agreed to by a majority of Israelis, a majority of Palestinians. So we don't really have lack of plans for peace. What do we lack? And here is where Sadat's memory must be recalled or invoked. What we lack is courageous politicians, given the fact that the majority of the Palestinians, majority of the Israelis, majority of the Arabs want peace in the Middle East. It is politicians who are reluctant, who do not want to pay a price, who do not want to take any risks. These are the stumbling block. That's something that President Sadat tuned me to observe, and I have been observing it since this encounter with him back in 1981, as I said, 5 weeks before he was assassinated. And he tells me the following, that there are many vested interests on both sides of the conflict, vested interests that are benefiting from the continuation of the conflict. And the unique step he undertook back in 1977 and then concluded the peace agreements a year and a half later was to break through these vested interests both on the Arab side and in the Israeli side. And therefore, I'd like to conclude by the fact that this is a moment, this is an Obama's moment, and my advice to Obama's people, and I hope Martin will convey that in Washington, is do not wait for the politicians to be convinced, to agree to everything on a blueprint. Speak to the people, address the people, say, all right, if you are not ready yet, why don't you put the agreement to a popular plebiscite or a referendum? This is the way to go, and I think that's what Sadat did, by the way. Many people do not realize that, yes, there were a lot of out-loud objection to Sadat's initiative, including my own, by the way. But, you know, these are the intellectuals, the intelligentsia who can articulate, who can speak, who can make a lot of noise. But Sadat knew, as a street politician, as a street-savvy politician, what their people really want. And therefore, he put the agreement, the draft agreement that he concluded with the Israelis, to a popular referendum. And he got a majority to agree to it. And therefore, I'm saying this is a clue. Since many leaders are still very hesitant to sign, let us all ask the Obama administration, and given the popularity he enjoys both here and in the Middle East, actually in the whole world, I think he can speak to the people directly, both here and there, and gather and mobilize enough popular support, international support, to put a reasonable, one of these 5 or 6 initiatives to a referendum and get it concluded, get it approved, and drag the politician to sign it instead of always being hesitant and reluctant and afraid and all of that. I conclude with that, and I hope you will help us to put that kind of pressure.
Thank you. So we're going to go to Joe.
Thank you very much. First, let me apologize to the audience. This is a very busy 2 days in the nuclear policy world, and I agreed to do a television interview that will force me to leave this panel about 15 minutes early. About 5 minutes after 4, a big black car is going to pull up and take me down to Denver to go on the BBC to talk about Mr. Obama's dramatic announcements yesterday, and then on the Rachel Maddow show later tonight. Rachel, where is she? Why isn't she here? So, and I apologize to my host. I will not be home for dinner tonight. So I probably won't get home till around the half of the basketball game. So I would like to take one small slice of this problem and lay it out. The military strategist Clausewitz said that in war all things are simple, but even the simple things are difficult. So I have four simple parts of an integrated plan for how to deal with Iran, but every single one of them is difficult. Here's the first part: engage. Engage. There is no other alternative, not for Iran, not for the Middle East. We have tried repeatedly efforts to coerce some of the parties in the Middle East into compliance or collapse. They have failed. Some people thought there was a military option for Lebanon. We got Hezbollah. Or a military solution for the PLO. We got Hamas. Or there's a military solution for Iran. We will get a nuclear-armed Iran faster than you can turn around. There is no alternative to engagement. This administration has recognized that, has decided to engage. We are now talking about how. It is not going to be easy. It is not going to be quick. Second, on Iran's nuclear program. Iran says it does not have a plan to build a nuclear weapon. I actually believe that's true. I don't believe there's any evidence that Iran has an active nuclear weapons program, but they certainly have a program to acquire the technologies that would allow them to build a nuclear weapon sometime in the near future should they decide to do so. That has got to be stopped. That has got to be stopped. But how do you convince Iran that a nuclear weapon is not in their security interest? Why shouldn't it be in their national security interest? They are surrounded by larger, more powerful nuclear-armed neighbors: Israel, Pakistan, India, Russia, China, and through our presence in the area of the United States. If nuclear weapons are good for those countries, if those countries insist that they have to have nuclear weapons for their security, and that we have to have 10,000 nuclear weapons, exactly why is it that Iran can't have 1 or 2 or 10? There has to be one standard for the world to follow. And yesterday, in the speech that I've been waiting my entire professional life for, Barack Obama in a square in Prague fundamentally transformed U.S. nuclear policy and said there's only one standard, and that standard is the elimination of nuclear weapons, and we will take the lead. We will lead. And he committed to starting with our own weapons, in partnership with Russia, to reduce our own weapons, and has started the process, I believe, to make dramatic reductions in the next 2 years in U.S. weapons, and then to bring in the other nuclear weapon states. That makes it much easier to go talk to other countries who are considering this and say, we're all walking down this road together. We're all going in the same direction. And there's a flip side of this, because it also helps you convince the others in the neighborhood. The problem with Iran getting a nuclear weapon is not that they would use it to attack Israel or attack the United States. That is suicide. They know what would happen next. It is a one-way trip. The problem is what happens in the neighborhood. What do Iran's neighbors do? They cannot allow Iran to have the political, diplomatic, military leverage that a nuclear weapon or the ability to make a nuclear weapon would give them. They would have to match that. They already have started. In the last 2 years, over a dozen Middle East nations have started their own civilian nuclear programs. Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Libya, Jordan, Tunisia, Morocco, United Arab Emirates. What's going on here? You think this is about Al Gore's movie? You think they're concerned about their carbon footprint? You think desert kingdoms need nuclear power? This is about Iran. This is not about an energy. This is about starting the decades-long process to acquire the intellectual and technological expertise they would need should they decide to pursue their own nuclear weapons. So there's got to be one standard for all on the nuclear weapons front. Third, you've got to get, even if you solve that, even if everyone agrees that we start reducing and we're not going to acquire these weapons, you've got the dual-use capabilities inherent in nuclear power. The problem isn't the nuclear reactor. 40 countries have nuclear reactors. Very few of them are building nuclear weapons. Only a handful have the ability to make the fuel. And that's your problem. It's what goes into that reactor and what comes out. The same factories that can enrich uranium for these fuel rods can enrich uranium for bombs. The same factories that can reprocess the spent fuel rods for storage can reprocess it to make plutonium for bombs. So you've got to get a handle on the fuel cycle, on the fuel enrichment and reprocessing capabilities. This is the problem with Iran. It's not the reactor, it's the fuel enrichment process facility they're building, and it's the plutonium reprocessing facility. In order to get them to give those up, again, there's got to be one standard. You've got to find a solution where no nation has individual enrichment or reprocessing facilities. Mohammed al-Baradei has proposed, the head of the IAEA, has proposed a multinational facility, maybe for the Middle East, if the power plants are to proceed. Perhaps there are genuine reasons for those. If they are going to proceed, then let's have a multinational facility the way Europe does. 3 nations in Europe together run the European fuel enrichment facility. Others have proposed a complete internationalization of these facilities. So they're owned by an international authority, for example, the IAEA. Now, that would mean we would put our fuel enrichment facility under international control. Truman proposed this many, many years ago. About every 15 years you get similar proposals. Barack Obama talked about it again yesterday. We have got to go step by step towards reforming that fuel cycle, make one standard for all. Finally, and this is my last point, all of this has to take place in the development of a new security arrangement for the Middle East, something my colleagues are much more expert on than I am. But you have got to have a system that resolves these underlying tensions, or else you will get a Middle East with not one nuclear power, Israel, not 2, but 4 or 5 nuclear powers, with the unresolved territorial, political, and ethnic disputes. That is a recipe for nuclear war. That is a recipe for nuclear war. Now, I know it's going to be hard to put together a security arrangement, but it is a lot easier than dealing with the Middle East nuclear war. And we have models. We know how to do this. I know when people talk about the Middle East, they say, oh, those people. Centuries of conflict. You're never going to get them to settle. We've done it. not in the Middle East, but in the bloodiest continent in human history, Europe. Europe. Europe has not had a major war since 1945. It is the longest period of peace in European history. The idea that France would invade Germany is now absurd. But that is exactly what France and Germany did for centuries, even before there was a France and Germany, when it was Franks and Goths. We don't do that anymore. You think we can, if we can do it in Europe, if we can do it in Southeast Asia, if we can do it with the ASEAN framework, big, complicated countries. Indochina is not at war. Indonesia and Malaysia are not at war. Certainly we can bring that same toolkit and that same political power to the Middle East. And I'm delighted, as Martin just said, that Barack Obama did this on day 2. On day 2, he started creating this new framework, started focusing the U.S. attention to this. None of this is easy. The alternatives are worse. I have seen miracles in my lifetime. I have seen Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland who said they would never negotiate, called each other terrorists. I've seen them join hands and sit down together in a joint government. I've seen the Soviet Union collapse. I've seen Eastern Europe rise. I've seen the Red Sox win the World Series twice. Don't tell me we can't do this. Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Say thank you, Joe. Ziad Asali.
Yes, I'm glad we can. I was thinking otherwise. Thank you all for coming here, and it is my privilege to be at this podium with so many distinguished students of the issues of the Middle East and teachers of the issues of the Middle East. The subject is broad, how to bring an integrated approach to solving the problem of the Middle East. I think it implies that there is a great deal of disintegration in the Middle East, and I agree. And I think one has to come up with some regional, at least construct of the solutions of the problems with the Middle East before one approaches each one sub-issue alone, be it Iran, Syria, Palestine, etc., etc. It is no surprise that both Martin and Saad and you somewhat also refer to it, to the issue of Palestine. There is no escaping the issue of Palestine. In fact, the great work of Saad on Egypt, producing a treaty that lasted for 40 years, and the Jordanian-Israeli treaty that followed thereafter, have not diminished one iota the significance of the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And now we have at the table this issue of peace between Syria and Israel. We certainly hope it will take place, and there is a lot of reason for optimism that it might. A lot of skepticism also is in order. But even if it does, that will leave the core conflict between the Palestinians and Israelis very much alive and at the core of the relation between the Middle East people in general and the West, and Israel in particular. This is a central issue, not because it is about real estate. It is precious real estate. But it also is a conflict about dignity. And that is one factor that has been so discounted in political calculations that it actually is entirely refreshing to see that the first act of the new president of the United States this time around is to call the Palestinian president and, communicate with him. Symbolic to the extreme and very useful. Then it followed with the other gestures, including the appointment of George Mitchell and the interview Al-Arabiya to the Muslim world. This is a conversation that has to take place. The sense that you are either with us or against us, that you are the other, would simply breed too many others who would be motivated to stand up to their dignity and not accept to be marginalized. So this is now a situation where we really have an engaged administration. By all appearances, by our conversations, by anybody's conversations with them, there is a level of seriousness in the implementation, the intent to implement, other than the agreement on the idea of a two-state solution. But at the same time, sadly, we have a terribly bad situation on the ground. The Palestinians are divided between at least Hamas and Fatah in two different geographic districts. And the Israelis come up with an administration that is, shall we say, far right, with some of with its prime minister refusing to acknowledge the two-state solution as the basis of the solution, where there is an international unanimity by now. The quartet, in case somebody needs to be reminded, the quartet is the whole world. It's the United States, Europe, Russia, and the United Nations, which is the whole world. Everybody's in agreement that the solution is a two-state solution. And here we have a prime minister in Israel who doesn't accept the principle, and a foreign minister who says unmentionable things. It is very unfortunate that this new administration now has to maneuver through this complex local set of difficult circumstances. The Palestinians find themselves in a very difficult situation where they are blamed for disunity and accused, as you implied, about the whole Arab people, the hopeless people who cannot get their act right. Well, that's possible. In fact, there is no word for strategy in the Arabic language, so, we need to keep that into consideration. They use strategia, which, anyway, so we having said that, I want to say that we have a situation where the Palestinians have pretty much lost control of the total power over their security systems and political system, precisely because of the regional changes that have taken place after September 11, and then which eventually led to the Iraq War and the emergence of Iran as probably the regional superpower. We have a situation where Iran was able to control Hamas, which is in Gaza, and has kicked out the PA authority altogether. It is hard to make unity with somebody who does not be united with you. And it is not necessary to make unity with an entity that would hobble you as you deal with the rest of the world. In a relay race, if you have 3 world champions with a 4th mate who has no ability to walk, you know one thing, that team is going to lose to any other team. So to hobble the Palestinians with an entity that is rejected globally at this point in time is yet one more huge problem that they're asked to somehow magically make disappear as they negotiate with the rest of the world the end of the occupation. Now, there is no substitute for a two-state solution. People have all kinds of ideas. None of them will end the conflict. A two-state solution is like democracy. It is the worst solution except for all the others. They just don't work. You know, what is it? Well, what do you do? Have one state? Have the Jewish people after thousands of years say, oh, well, really, yeah, why don't we unite with the Arabs and have one state and undo the state of Israel? It's not going to happen. Or do you just get rid of a couple of million people out of the West Bank or 1.5 million people out of Gaza, throw them away somewhere? It's not going to happen. And we have to come to terms with this. The two-state solution is the conflict-ending agreement. It is, therefore, significant what Mr. Obama said today in Istanbul about his commitment to a two-state solution and about his commitment to the roadmap and Annapolis. Interestingly, Annapolis is something that the new foreign minister of Israel just rejected out of hand. So we have a serious public position that the administration is taking, and I think that is going to be required in the long haul. It is fine to say the right things and to give the right signals. It is harder to implement. Right now, we have an erosion of the actual land mass that is left for the establishment of a Palestinian state because of the encroachment of the settlements. It is like, you know, we're sharing a loaf of bread, and I keep eating it, and you're waiting till I give you the rest of it, and I continue eating. Well, you know, even if they don't know what the strategy is, they know what this means. So this has to stop. This has to stop. And this is a place where the Israeli establishment is simply incapable of making that decision and making it stick. Not a single prime minister in the history of Israel has been able to restrain the settlement, expanding settlement activity. So it is fair to conclude that this new prime minister is probably not going to do it either. Well then, do we sit by and say, well, it's too late, there will be no state, and there will be no solution, this will be a conflict that will go on? No, cannot. This is where the United States is singularly qualified to be of help. And this is why the United States constituents and the people who support the two-state solution are to lend their support to this administration as it tries to, above everything else, put an end to settlement expansion right now as we negotiate the rest. I've just been handed this, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to every one of our panelists. I was going to ask if anyone had any comments they would like to make on anyone else's statement first from the panelists' side. Yes? Yeah. All right, let's get to the audience. We would love to take your questions. There's a microphone here. What I would ask is if we have any students in the crowd who want to make sure they get to ask a question, please raise your hand as you come up to the microphone and let me know that you're there so I can help make sure we get that far in our questions. Please, sir, go ahead.
It's been said for many years that it is political suicide in the United States for an American politician to criticize Israel very strongly. I'd be interested in your comments on that, whether you think that's something that we can overcome, because the Israeli lobby is very strong in this country and has taken steps in the past to, in some ways, take a pound of flesh for anyone that criticizes Israel on a major issue.
Let me start. The Israeli lobby is very strong, and I say this as a firm supporter of Israel and someone who has family in Israel. The Indian American lobby is strong. Hell, the Irish lobby is pretty strong. You got to deal with strong lobbies. You have to understand what they want. You have to understand their tactics and build a compromise coalition that can assure them that you're taking care of their interests. There's nothing insurmountable about this problem. It's just a fact of political life.
If I take a crack at this, I know that the Israeli lobby is strong, and this is America. You know, let anybody else come and compete and say if they have a different idea. But I think it is tragic to think of this conflict at this point in time and from this point onward as a zero-sum game, as to whatever is good for Israel is bad for Palestine. It is precisely a prescription for continued disaster. And what we need to do is to redefine the game, to give something for the Israelis, something for the Palestinians that they both can live with, and then the Israeli lobby would be the first to support it.
Please. More? No?
No, Ms. Saad suggested we take a few questions.
Yes. Please, let's take a couple more.
At the IAEA's website, you can read numerous letters from leaders in the Middle East that have been asking the IAEA to deal with what they consider Israel's threat to peace in the Middle East due to their nuclear capabilities. Can you ever imagine the U.S. pressuring Israel to sign the NPT treaty, the treaty that they want their neighbors to abide by?
Again, let me start. I wouldn't use the word pressure, but I would use the word convince. We try to convince Israel of all kinds of things and have historically, including 40 years ago. I think at some point Israel's going to have to take its bombs out of the basement and put them on the negotiating table. But it is never going to do that, no matter how irrelevant they are to their current security situation, until its security situation improves, until everyone in that region recognizes the right to exist of every other nation, until there is a solution to the Palestinian problem. Then and only then are you going to be able to convince Israel of what is in its own interests. Nuclear weapons are the only weapon that can destroy Israel. It's in their interest to make sure that nobody in the region has those weapons. And if the price for that is them giving it up at a time when everyone else is marching down that same road, yes, I think you can do it. I said it simply, but it is a little difficult.
Thank you.
Let me just add a couple of points in this regard. I think that Joe has it exactly right. It's interesting that the successive Israeli governments have actually supported the idea of a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. They're actually on record in that regard. They've also been prepared to sign up to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, if only we would go ahead and make that happen. But I think President Obama is going to make that a priority. If we can achieve an end to the Arab-Israeli conflict, that creates precisely the environment in which it becomes possible to establish a nuclear weapons-free zone. I don't think it's at all possible before we resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Sir.
Two questions, if I may. The first, I was a news correspondent in the Middle East for a number of years, and when I returned to my country, I was convinced that nothing would change U.S. policy on the Middle East until there was a significant shift in the American Jewish community's position. And in recent years, and months even, I have noticed that two new American Jewish organizations have appeared on the scene. One, a Hebrew name I can't remember, but the other, J Street, is the name of it. Question is, to what extent do you think this is a significant and important shift?
Yeah, I have learned not to get involved with Jewish politics. Having said that, this is a free country, and there needs to be a debate. There needs to be a debate. There needs to be a debate in Israel about the strategic objectives of the state, the decision makers for the state. Where are you going with this project? Where are you going with it? Encroachment on the West Bank land might be justified, by the fanatics who do it and for other reasons. But it does erode the one single thing that the Israeli people, the Jewish people throughout the ages have asked for, which is to have their own state. There will not be a Jewish state if this process continues. And these are the arguments that are reverberating in the United States, and we'd like to see that in Israel. We'd like to see counter-arguments in the Palestinian Arab side also, and that's another question.
The questioner mentioned this new organization, J Street. And I dug out my BlackBerry because J Street just issued a poll which answers the first part of your proposition. It was a poll of American Jews in which it found that 88% of them support the United States playing an active role in helping the parties resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict. And this figure remained at 86%, even when the pollsters said that the active role meant America would publicly state its disagreements with both Israel and the Arabs. And 81% supported an active US role, even if it meant that America would exert pressure on both Israelis and Arabs to make compromises.
My second question is, there now seems to be a balancing of the negatives between the Palestinians and Israel, in that we have Hamas saying that they would never recognize the Jewish state, and now we have a new prime minister from the party, Likud, that says there will never be a Palestinian state. Do you think that these balancing negatives has a positive side?
Thank you.
May I? I think you put your hand on it. And I was talking to Martin as we were walking here about, since he is an expert on Israeli politics, having served there as an ambassador, I asked them what to make of Netanyahu's tenure. Is that going to bode well or ill for the peace process? And he said, you know, it's an interesting question, complicated question. And here is my take on it. Looking again at the history of the conflict and at the history of other or similar protracted conflicts. Menachem Begin was a right-winger, just like Netanyahu. Very hard, a former terrorist himself, who remained on the wanted lists of Great Britain from 1946 to 1987. However, it was him who signed a peace treaty with another terrorist, Anwar Sadat. Many of you probably do not know that, but Anwar Sadat, if you read his biography, he is an admitted terrorist. He killed the prime minister. So as Menachem Begin did, you know, blow up all kinds of civilian institutions and so on. And yet, sometimes hardliners can, in fact, especially toward the end of their life, can come to an agreement. We see that also in Nixon. Nobody could have taken the bold move to recognize China, except somebody who has a reputation of being a hardliner like Nixon. Same thing happened in Algeria. It was Charles de Gaulle who came to power on the platform of keeping Algeria French. He was the one who signed the agreement that granted Algeria its independence. So I'm not so skeptical about Netanyahu or about Hamas. I think if there is an equitable formula, and if there is enough international pressure, and if, as I said, challenge these guys, challenge Netanyahu, and challenge Abu Mazen to put the agreement to a plebiscite, to a vote in their own countries. I think if you do that, you probably can get very positive results.
Sometimes hardliners are hardliners.
Go ahead, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. I am Iranian. My name is Isa from Tehran. Well, I have some questions. First of all, about the Jews and Muslims. Muslims and Jewish are from one father and two mothers, Sarah and Hajar. Sarah was the father of the Ishaq, and Hajar was the father of the Ismail. Muhammad is from Ismail, and Jews are from Ismail. But we Iranians, and especially Iranians, We have more than 3,000 years relation with Jewish people from Babylon. I hope the Jewish people, they know what happened from Ashur-banipal. What happened to the Jewish when they released by the Persian Emperor Darius, and they migrated them to Isfahan. A very big city is Iran, which has a very rich land and a lot of water. And we have a queen, Esther Mordechai. She was a Jewish queen in Iran. This is about the relation between the Jewish and Iranian. About Christianity, when the Jesus Christ born.
Can we please get a question, sir?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, for the Iran, gentlemen, why you are just blaming Iran for the nuclear? The fossil fuel will be finished within not very much. Then what? Iran has to have nuclear power for electricity and other cases. Well, the mother, if she wants to feed the child, she cannot to put the candle to heat the milk. She should have the power to heat the milk and raise the child.
Thank
and
you.
This is, sir.
The question, sir?
Mr. Isa,
yes.
None of the panelists single-handedly or one-sidedly blamed Iran for anything. If anything, the panelists are of the opinion that an equitable solution to create a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East and what applies to Iran should apply to other countries in the region. I think that's the way to go, and I think that is where Mr. Obama seemed to be leaning, is to have a consistent policy to have a free zone, nuclear-free zone in the Middle East. And I think that would be good for everybody, including the Iranian.
But I hear that they blame the Eastern countries, they blame Iran. No nuclear, no nuclear, no nuclear. Why? Why, sir? Why, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, why?
Good question, thank you.
Inshallah, we'll be thinking.
Thank you.
Allah.
Sir, yes, please.
Yeah, Mr. Ibrahim, you briefly mentioned some vast interest that is invested in keeping the conflict in state of conflict, and I was just wondering if you can shed some more light on some of those interests, or who's behind them.
Yes. President Sadat told me something that I did not believe in the beginning. He said, none of these guys, the rejectionists, are going to make peace with Israel or fight Israel. They want to keep the issue unresolved because it is in their vested interest to keep some kind of managed tension, because that's where they base their legitimacy on it. And this was a conversation in the summer of 1981. Since then, I have been observing the process, peacemaking process. I happened to be in prison when Camp David, Palestinian-Israeli Camp David negotiation was taking place. The Clinton package that Martin was part of, not part of the package, but part of the agreement. I thought at the time, this is an equitable, not necessarily absolutely just, but an equitable solution. From prison, one of the few letters I wrote from prison, I wrote actually 2 letters. One of them was to Yasser Arafat, basically begging him to accept the Clinton package, the Clinton formula. Well, he did not. And unfortunately, and I said in the letter, Palestinians would regret turning that down, that package. They would regret it for the next 10 years. And as the saying goes, this conflict has been a conflict of missed opportunities. We have missed so many opportunities because either Israelis drag their feet for too long, or Palestinians and Arabs drag their feet for too long. And during that feet dragging, an extremist will jump to the center stage and make something suicidal or assassinate a Sadat, a Rabin, and set back the whole process for 5, 6, 7 years. And therefore, I blame actually the moderates on both sides for not being decisive. And that's why I proposed, and I repeat, let the international community demand that you go to the people directly to ask them, do you want a conclusion to that tragic conflict? If so, say yes. And that is the only way we can get these politicians to sign on the dotted line. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Please.
If I could just respond to Saad. The one problem I have with your approach, Saad, is you let the leaders off the hook too easily. You know, as you were talking about President Sadat, it reminded me of something I'm sure you will recall, which was that he would sit in front of the television cameras, puffing on his pipe, and explain to the Egyptian people why peace was in their interests. And that was the essence of leadership. You know, you point out correctly, I believe, that Arafat let the chance go by. He let the chance go by because he lacked the courage to stand in front of his people and tell them at that moment, I got you Jerusalem, which he did. That was, he would have had sovereignty over all of the Arab suburbs of Jerusalem, 3 of the 4 quarters of the old city, and the Haram al-Sharif, the top of the Temple Mount where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is. He could have stood in front of his people and said, I got you Jerusalem, but you will not have the right of return to Israel. He never spoke to his people about the right of return except to promise them that they would have the right of return. And so at the critical moment when he had to make that leap, he had not prepared his public. And I think it's really important. You know, just a quick anecdote. Yeah. When Netanyahu and Arafat negotiated the Hebron agreement, when we finalized that agreement, Netanyahu actually turned to Arafat and said, you know, we both have crazies in Hebron. Your people are crazy there and my people are crazy there. You, Mr. Chairman, and I should go there and speak to them together. Right. You know, it was a great idea. And Arafat said, yes, 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 yes. But neither of them had the courage to actually go and do it. And so I think it's really important in the context of this idea of putting it to the people that the leaders be required to speak to their people about the importance of peace.
Well, I fully agree with you, but I'd rather get the people off the hook with war than saving the neck of the politicians. Politicians will never do anything. If we have the kind of leadership, Martin, if we have the kind of leadership that Sadat or Rabin or Begin, if we have figures like them, you don't have to do this plebiscite. But I'm saying in the absence of the statesmanship, of the leadership, the charismatic figures that can take bold steps, De Gaulle, Sadat, Rabin, if you don't have that, then go above the mediocre leaders that exist now to the people directly. That's all of them.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm a student here at SB. Just wanted to kind of continue the conversation on that we have Hezbollah and Hamas, and they're very radical, and they're kind of controlling the Palestinian people now. With the backing of Iran, what is Israel most likely going to do with the U.S. in trying to stop these groups, and so we can get in and talk to the people and reach that two-state solution?
You know, I don't think Israel or the United States has an effective strategy for dealing what is asymmetrical warfare that Hezbollah and Hamas are waging. You can see how Israel has tried to use force to resolve this first in Lebanon in the summer of 2006 and then in Gaza in January of this year. And in both cases, they succeeded in apparently strengthening the support for Hezbollah and Hamas, at least across the region. And so it really is necessary to come up with a more effective strategy. I think the heart of the matter is to catch Hamas in particular in its own dilemma. Hamas moved from being a terrorist organization to taking control in Gaza. In effect, it did it by military putsch, but it is now in control in Gaza. And the Israelis decided not to pursue a policy of regime change in January when they went into Gaza. So if they're going to be left in control, then they need to be put in a situation where they have to choose between fighting Israel or feeding the Palestinian people under their control. And if we can put them in that dilemma, therein lies the key to a greater pragmatism that can lead eventually to a greater moderation. How is that done? It's done through a sustainable ceasefire in which Hamas commits not to firing rockets, promoting violence against Israel, and commits not to smuggling in offensive weapons, in return for which the passages are opened in a way that enables the reconstruction of Gaza to take place. And if they don't live up to that commitment, then they will be held responsible for the fact that the passages are then closed again.
Problem is that Martin and I will continue discussing the Palestinian issue, in the next session. So there's not much left to discuss. But I do want to comment about what you said and what Martin said. This last January, Israel attacked Gaza. It had the full capability to put an end to Hamas leadership. It knew where they were exactly, under which hospital, in which, intensive care or in whatever place they were. And they were behind Israeli lines at times. And Israel did make a decision not to finish the regime. No regime change in Gaza. And the logic was, of course, that they will, in time, become more pliable and would keep the ceasefire that they had rejected prior to the attack, and will ultimately behave the way that the PLO has. Well, they may or may not be right in this diagnosis, because in medicine, if your diagnosis is wrong, you and your patient are in trouble. I fear, as a doctor who has moved into this political stuff, that there is no political malpractice in politics, which is very unfortunate.
Ziad, I'm going to have to stop you, and I know that there are people who are going to want to come back and hear you in the next hour. I want to say thank you to all of our panelists for a great job, and we really appreciate you coming. Thank you.